For 40 years I've been cooking for them, and they still call me useless. At what point did I stop being their mother and become a servant? My name is Eleanor Grace, I'm 63 years old. My whole life has revolved around my husband, Samuel Thomas, and our 2 children, Maxwell and Abigail. Since I got married at 23, I haven't thought about myself once. Cooking, cleaning, caring, repeating, day after day, like a soulless clock. I believed that this was love, that this silent self-sacrifice was the duty of a good mother. Samuel Thomas was always a dry man, one of those who never says thank you, but I clung to the small gestures. An empty plate, a casually thrown not bad. We lived in a modest house in Springfield, where the walls knew more about me than anyone else. There I simmered my dreams until they evaporated like steam from pots. Every dish was an act of love, although no one noticed. Maxwell, the eldest, was born with a raspy and demanding cry. Abigail, 2 years later, appeared with a smile that made me believe that everything was worth it. They grew up strong, healthy, and I was proud of them. But I never told them how I cried in silence when no one was watching, how my back ached for hours after cooking their favorite meals, and how I suppressed my fatigue so that they would have a happy childhood. I didn't work outside, as they say, but I worked every day without a single break. I was a cook, a nurse, an advisor, a teacher. Sometimes I ask myself if it was a mistake because the day I heard that word unproductive, something inside me broke forever. And I realized that everything was about to change. The kitchen was my refuge, my trench, and my temple. There I hid when Samuel Thomas raised his voice or when the children came with their problems and didn't know how to tell me they were sad. In every dish I cooked, there was a piece of me, from the tamales we made in December to the rice porridge with milk that Maxwell asked for every time he had a fever. I didn't have luxury, but I had flavor, and that was enough for me. For many years I believed that feeding my family was an expression of love that didn't require recognition. But over time, the faces that once lit up with a smile at the sight of food became indifferent. Samuel Thomas stopped sitting at the table with me. Maxwell ate dinner in front of the television. Abigail, already a teenager, began to say that my food smelled old. My heart ached, but I continued to cook as before. I remember getting up at 5 in the morning, even in winter, when the cold pierced to the bone. I baked tortillas, cooked chilaquiles, left lunch and dinner ready. No one asked, no one thanked me, but I did it because it was my way of saying, I love you. Sometimes I asked myself if anyone noticed, if they ever thought about me, not just about what I served on the plate. One morning, while I was making chicken broth because Abigail had a sore throat, I heard her say to a friend on the phone, "My mom only cooks, she doesn't do anything else. It's about time she found something useful to do." I froze. The spoon trembled in my hand. Useful. Didn't 40 years of taking care of their lives count as work? From that day on, every dish tasted a little more bitter to me. Over the years, the house grew, but not in walls, but in that gaping emptiness that lay between us. Maxwell flew to the city to study, and Abigail locked herself in her room more and more often, as if in an impregnable fortress. Samuel Thomas spoke less and less, as if I had become part of the furniture, nothing more. Sometimes whole days would pass before anyone asked how I was feeling, but I kept cooking as if nothing had happened. One evening, I decided to cook their favorite dish, enchiladas rojas with oven-baked potatoes and horchata. It was an ordinary Tuesday, with no reason to celebrate, but I wanted so much to see them happy. When they sat down at the table, none of them even looked at me. Samuel Thomas silently devoured his food. Abigail left her plate almost untouched. Maxwell, who had come to visit, blurted out, grimacing, "Mom, can't you make something more modern? You always cook the same thing." I felt as if someone had scooped out my soul with a spoon. After that dinner, I went to my room and cried quietly, burying my face in the pillow so they wouldn't hear me. I didn't understand at what point I had lost my family. I had given them everything, even the desire to live. Maybe I'm exaggerating, I told myself, all children become like that over time. But deep down, I was already beginning to foresee what I so desperately didn't want to admit. They no longer saw me as a mother, just a free servant. And yet, the next morning, at exactly 5, I got up to make breakfast. I made mallets with refried beans, fresh cheese, and pico de gallo, like in the days when they were children. Because even when my soul was breaking, I still clung to the foolish hope that a good breakfast would bring back some of the love I so longed for. One evening, while clearing the dirty dishes, I overheard Samuel Thomas quietly say, "Eleanora Grace has become a burden, she contributes nothing." I didn't know if he was serious or if it was a cruel joke, but the phrase hit me like a brick to the head. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and looked in the mirror. A woman with graying hair, chapped hands, and empty eyes stared back at me. Had I really become a burden? For 40 years, I had taken care of everything without being asked. I paid the electricity bills, did the laundry, cooked hot meals, and kept the house clean. Never complained, never asked for a salary. When Samuel Thomas had financial problems, I sold my jewelry. When Maxwell couldn't afford university, I pawned the blender and cooked by hand, but no one appreciated it. All these efforts were invisible to them. One Sunday, while I was preparing pozole for the whole family, Maxwell suddenly declared loudly, "Mom doesn't understand what real work is, that's why she thinks cooking is enough." I froze with the knife in my hand, as if struck by lightning. No one corrected him, no one stood up for me, not even Abigail, who used to hug me at night, crying. In that moment, I realized that my story meant nothing to them, all that mattered was what I put on their plates. That night, I went to bed without touching dinner. My stomach growled, but it wasn't hunger, it was rage. Rage at allowing myself to become a function. I was no longer their mother or wife, I had become the one who cooks. And the worst part was that I had started to believe it myself. Maxwell got a job at a large company and started visiting less and less. With each visit, I noticed how he became more arrogant, colder. He spoke as if we were all beneath him. Even Samuel Thomas looked at him with some pride. I served food while they discussed their affairs, as if I were invisible. And worst of all, they didn't even try to feign respect for me. They treated me as if I were only good for servitude. One day, while I was mopping the hallway floor, Maxwell said to his father, "You should convince Mom to sell this house. She doesn't do anything with it anyway." I stopped abruptly, as if I had been struck. Doesn't do anything with it. 40 years of cleaning, 40 years of maintaining life within these walls, and that wasn't enough? Samuel Thomas didn't answer, just waved his hand with irritation, as if it were a heavy burden they didn't know how to get rid of. I continued mopping the floor, feeling a lump rise in my throat. There were no more tears. I was simply drying up inside. Abigail married a man I barely knew. They came from time to time, always in a hurry and not hungry. They never tasted the food I cooked with such love. They said they were eating healthy or had already had dinner. And although it hurt me, I still smiled. I clung to the few minutes they spent at home, even if they ignored me. I clung to the memories of the times when they still called me Mom. With tenderness. One evening, I overheard Abigail telling her husband, "My mom has never done anything useful, she just stayed at home." The phrase pierced my chest like a dagger. I went out into the yard and knelt on the ground between the empty pots where basil and epazote once grew. Everything around me was dry, withered, like myself. That day, I realized that there was no place for me here anymore. But they couldn't imagine that I was already planning my departure. I woke up with a vague premonition, as if something was about to break. I made coffee, sweet bread, and chilaquiles, but no one came down for breakfast. At 9 in the morning, I heard voices from the living room. Samuel Thomas was talking to Maxwell about investments and mentioned the house. "We can put it in Abigail's name and Mom can sign, then we won't have any problems in the future," my son said. My own son speaks of me as a legal obstacle. I don't know how long I stood there, listening, unnoticed. The words echoed in my head. After 40 years of cooking, cleaning, raising them, now they want to throw me out even from the documents. Excluding me from the property I maintained with my own hands was especially painful because it came from Maxwell, the same child who cried in my arms when he had a fever, the one who asked me not to leave for work secretly. That evening, I sat down with them at the table, pretending I knew nothing, that I hadn't heard their plans. I served them tlalpino with freshly baked tortillas. They ate in silence, as if I didn't exist at all. Then Samuel Thomas asked me to sign some papers. "It's to update something in the insurance," he said. I stared at the documents, not touching them. Inside, everything within me was shattered, yet outwardly, I still smiled. I placed the documents in a folder and went up to my room. I locked the door. I took out the old wooden box where I kept the few things that belonged to me. My handwritten recipes, some photographs of my children when they were small, and an envelope with money I had been hiding for years. That night, I made a decision. They may have considered me useless, but they would see what an invisible woman is capable of when she decides to leave without a sound. That same night, while everyone was asleep, I began to pack my things. I took very little. A change of clothes, my recipe notebooks, a few photographs I clung to from the past, and that envelope with crumpled bills that I had been saving with fear and patience. I wasn't going to leave them a note. I didn't want fake tears and empty apologies. If I was so insignificant to them, then my disappearance wouldn't matter either. Or would it? I left before dawn. The streets were deserted, permeated with cold, but inside me, a flame was igniting. I walked to the train station, my heart pounding like a frantic drum. I didn't have a clear plan, I just wanted to escape. I bought a ticket to the first place that seemed appealing to me, Santa Fe. I didn't know anyone there, but it didn't matter. All I needed was silence, solid ground beneath my feet, and a kitchen where I could start over. All the way, I looked out the window, trying not to think about anything, not about Maxwell, not about Abigail, not about Samuel Thomas. They were no longer a part of me. For the first time in decades, I felt light. I no longer carried the burden of their complaints, their demands, their contempt. I only carried my name, Eleanor Grace. And although I no longer knew who I really was, I was ready to find out. This time, not for them, but for myself. At noon, I arrived in downtown Santa Fe. The stone streets and colorful houses greeted me like an old acquaintance. I found a cheap boarding house and paid for a week in advance. Lying down on the hard bed, I took a deep breath. I was free, but also alone. However, this loneliness didn't seem as bitter as a lifetime spent with those who only knew how to use me. They didn't know I was gone yet, and that was part of the plan. The next day, I went to the market in search of something that would fill my life with meaning. The smell of dough, cinnamon, and dried chili reminded me of my childhood, when I helped my mother sell tamales at a makeshift stall. I stopped in front of a woman who was making tortillas by hand. I asked her for a serving, and as I ate in silence, I felt my hands wanting to work again, but this time for myself. With the little money I had, I bought the basic ingredients: corn, beans, rice, tomatoes, epazote, and some banana leaves. I didn't know how I was going to survive, but I had everything I needed. I started cooking on the small stove in the boarding house, and soon the aroma filled everything around. The woman who rented the other room came and asked me to sell her a plate. I did it with pleasure, and it was my first sale. That night, counting the coins on my bed, I felt a mixture of fear and hope. It was little, but it was mine. I earned it with my hands, the only thing I knew how to do: cook with love. The next day, I made tamales and took them, wrapped in a basket, to the market. I stood in a corner, not saying a word, but the aroma spoke for me. 1, 2, 5 people approached me. By noon, I had sold everything. Thus, my small business was born. No one knew about it, not Samuel Thomas, nor my children. They considered me a burden, a barren woman. But here I am, with my hands stained with dough, building a new life. They thought they had gotten rid of me, not knowing that they were freeing me to be reborn. Gradually, people at the market began to recognize me. They called me Senora of the Hot Tamales, and it made me smile every time. One day, a man in a hat asked me if I did catering, and without hesitation, I said yes. That same day, I prepared red rice, meat and green sauce, and nopala salad for 6 people. They paid me more than I expected. My eyes widened in surprise, and I couldn't help but smile, thanking them for their generosity. In the humble bathroom of the boarding house, I wept with happiness, tears streaming down my face. The days spun by in a frantic rhythm. From early morning, I worked my magic over the stove. At noon I took my creations to sell, and in the evening, exhausted, I collapsed. No luxuries, but what a blessing. Each dish that came from my hand was like a challenge, a victory over everything I had been made to believe. I was no longer invisible. My hands no longer fed only ungrateful mouths, now they were forging my future. For the first time in my life, I felt in control of my destiny, the owner of something truly valuable. One Saturday, a young woman approached me and asked if I had a social media page to promote my food. I laughed in her face. I didn't even have my own phone. She helped me create an online account, filling it with photos of my dishes and a simple but meaningful phrase, "Food with love, made by wise hands." Within a week, orders were pouring in, and I could barely keep up. What was born out of humiliation was turning into something huge, something bigger than I could have imagined. I had no idea I was about to become a viral sensation. I didn't know that a bizarre twist of fate would bring me into the light, introduce me to thousands of people who would hear my story. But something inside me already sensed it. A spark of hope, smoldering deep within my soul, was growing brighter, foreshadowing change. My days of silence were coming to an end, and with them, the impunity of those who treated me as if I were worthless. One evening, as I was frying potato pancakes with cheese, a girl came in with a phone in her hand. She asked permission to film me cooking. At first, I was shy, but she insisted. "People on social media want to hear real stories, and yours is felt in every bite," she said. I agreed. She filmed me frying, talking about how I started alone, with a stove that someone had lent me. I didn't know that this video would change my life forever. 2 days later, I had hundreds of comments, thousands of views. People from all over the country were asking if I shipped food. Others wanted to know more about my story. Many said I reminded them of their grandmothers, their mothers. Others cried because of what I was saying. I didn't quite understand what was happening, but something had touched people deeply. My pain, transformed into flavor, was healing others too. The boarding house owner offered me the use of her large kitchen in exchange for daily meals. I agreed without hesitation, and with this opportunity, everything started to develop rapidly. A local channel contacted me for an interview. I was nervous, but I went. I sat in front of the camera and told the truth, about how my family called me useless after 40 years of cooking for them. About how I left without warning in search of at least a drop of respect. When the show aired, messages poured in, even from those who knew Samuel Thomas and my children. Some asked if it was true, others apologized on their behalf. I answered everyone with one phrase: women like me don't disappear, they just stop serving those who don't know how to appreciate them. But I didn't know that my words would reach ears I didn't expect to hear again. On Wednesday evening, I saw a message. Someone wrote to me from an unknown number. "Is that you, Mom?" I froze. I immediately knew it was Maxwell. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, another message: "We saw the video." Abigail saw it too. "Dad is furious." My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was an old, suppressed rage that flared up with new force. Now they remembered my existence. I stared at the screen for a long time, not knowing whether to answer. One part of me longed to shout out everything they had done to me. The other just wanted to continue living my life, but something told me this was just the beginning. The next day, there was a knock on the boarding house door. It was a messenger. He brought a box of flowers and a note. "Forgive us, we miss you." Not even signed. It seemed like a cruel joke. The messenger said they were sent from Springfield. I was silent as a stone. I took the box and immediately threw it in the trash. Not because I felt avenged, but because I no longer needed their empty apologies. For years I had been ignored, humiliated, used. And now, when I had achieved some public attention, success, if it's worth anything at all, they suddenly remembered. I'm sorry, but my pride is not a bargaining chip. That night I slept badly, not from sadness, but from the certainty that they would soon come in person. I knew they would be back. They always came back when it was to their advantage. And this time I understood that they would come not with tears, but with excuses, with reproaches, or even with demands. But I was no longer the same. They will meet another woman, they will meet Eleanor Grace. 3 days later, as I was leaving the market with an empty basket but a full soul, I saw them standing in front of the boarding house with faces portraying false concern. Samuel Thomas, Abigail, and Maxwell, dressed as if for mass, polished as if trying to hide years of contempt under a sanctimonious guise. My stomach churned, but not from excitement. From disgust. Now they wanted to talk to me. I said nothing. I walked past them and headed straight inside. They followed me. Samuel Thomas, as always, spoke first. "Stop making a scene, this is resolved in the family." I didn't look at him, just sat down to tidy up my things. Abigail started to cry, but her tears didn't move me. I cried about her for 20 years, and she didn't notice. Now that she's crying, it's too late. Maxwell didn't mince words. "Mom, people are pointing fingers at us. Why did you portray us in such a light?" At that moment, a dry, joyless laugh escaped me. Portray in a light. After you called me worthless, plotted to take my home, and morally destroy me. They weren't seeking forgiveness. They wanted me to save them from the shame they faced before others, but that wasn't my concern. The judgment they feared wasn't mine, but the judgment of their own conscience, if they even had one left. I looked at them calmly and said, "Don't worry, I won't ask anything of you. I'm no longer your burden. I no longer cook for you. I no longer clean up after you, I no longer belong to you. You can leave." Samuel Thomas wanted to object, but I silenced him with a look. Maxwell frowned. Abigail lowered her head, and one by one, they walked out the door. A door that, this time, would no longer open for them. After that visit, there was no word from them for several days, but I sensed something was brewing. When a family that despises you feels exposed, they don't seek redemption, they seek power. I had become unmanageable. A neighbor whispered that someone had been asking about me around the area. An angry man with a mustache. It was Samuel Thomas. Surely, he longed to repeat his performance, but this time, I wasn't going to hide. The next morning, my video was posted by a large page featuring women's stories. My number of followers skyrocketed from 1,000 to 20,000 in a matter of hours. I was stunned but also felt not alone. Women from all over the country wrote to me, sharing their stories. I am not alone. Countless Eleanor Graces were scattered across the country, invisible, silent, and now awakened. Maxwell wrote again. This time the message was different. "Mom, how do you have so many followers? Who is helping you? Who are you working with?" I understood immediately. No concern, just interest. I felt him losing that role of something I once considered my own, my life. Now he needed to know if I had allies, connections, money. For him, everything was a transaction, even his mother. I read his message and left it unanswered. I left him as he had left me for so many years, waiting, ignored, without answers. That night, I slept like a log, as if making up for years of insomnia. The sleep was deep, serene, and a warm feeling of confidence spread through my chest. They were no longer afraid of losing me. Now they were tormented by the fear that I no longer needed them. One afternoon, as I was conjuring up rice pudding for the local fair, an unexpected call came. It was a reporter from a national television channel. She wanted to interview me not only because of my cooking but also because of my story. She said that many women saw themselves reflected in it. I hesitated for a moment, but then I thought, why should I be silent now? I've been silenced for decades. It's time for my voice to feed more than just stomachs. The interview aired on Sunday evening. In the report, I stood in my kitchen, telling how my family had erased me from their lives. I didn't name names, but all of America understood who I was talking about. The next day, the phone was ringing off the hook. I was offered collaborations, courses, even a scholarship to start my own business, and the most incredible thing. A notary wrote to inform me that Samuel Thomas had tried to sell the house, but he couldn't. The document was still in my name. I looked at that letter, and a smile rose from the depths of my soul. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. I cleaned that house with my own hands. I supported it when they only knew how to destroy it. Now they couldn't take even that away. I defeated them without raising my voice, without shouting. I defeated them by being everything they despised, constant, generous, and strong. That same evening, Samuel Thomas called again. I didn't answer a word because I realized something important. There is a silence that is stronger than any claim. I was no longer seeking his repentance. I was no longer waiting for love. I was busy rebuilding myself with every meal I cooked, and they were trapped in the ruins they had built themselves. Several weeks have passed since that last call. My business was growing, my name began to be heard beyond Santa Fe, and my face appeared in notes about a woman who was reborn from the kitchen. One Sunday morning, I made an unexpected decision. I was returning to Springfield not to stay but to see with my own eyes what I had left behind. I needed to complete this circle face to face, without fear. I boarded the bus with a basket of my first sale, empty but full of symbolism. The road was long but not burdensome. Arriving, I stopped in front of the old house. The facade was neglected, the plants withered, the curtains dirty. I approached slowly, as if looking at a grave. No one came out. I rang the doorbell once. Abigail opened it. Her face paled at the sight of me, as if she had seen a ghost. I said nothing, just looked at her. Behind her appeared Maxwell with a phone in his hand. He was probably writing something down or trying to use my image to whitewash his reputation. Behind all of this, I saw Samuel Thomas in his chair with the TV on. As always. The only thing that had changed was me. I was no longer his shadow, no longer his emotional servant, I was a woman who had stood on her own 2 feet without anyone's permission. I handed them a sealed envelope. It contained no money or papers. It was a letter, my last word. Without saying goodbye, I turned my back on them and, with a firm step, went down the stairs. I didn't look back. The past, when it stops hurting, isn't revisited, it's left behind. They didn't know it yet, but this letter was more than just a goodbye. It was a warning that there was no place for my name in their story anymore. The letter was short. I wasn't trying to make them cry or feel remorse. I just wanted them to read what I could never say out loud. I wrote to them that for all these 40 years I had cooked with love, not out of a sense of duty. That every dish was an act of giving, not just a service. That when they called me useless, it wasn't just an insult, it was a cruel summary of a whole life they had devalued. I wrote to them that I left because I could no longer stay in a place where I was required to be silent, present, and grateful, without receiving a single thank you in return. I wrote to them that I didn't expect apologies, that I didn't need understanding. I just wanted them to know, I hadn't disappeared. I left, preserving my dignity, not out of spite. And the woman they now see on TV, on channels, at fairs, it's not someone new, it's the same me that was always in front of them, just now free. In the last line, I made it clear that I would not return. Not out of pride, but out of self-respect. I ended the letter with my full name, Eleanor Grace Bennett, because even that had been taken from me, my identity. I had always been a wife, a mother. But not anymore. Now it's my own story. A story that was prepared slowly, over low heat, but with a firm seasoning. I never found out if they cried, got angry, or tore up the letter. I didn't care. The only thing I wanted was to be free. And, leaving that letter on the table in the house that no longer belonged to me, I felt like I had dropped a bag off my back. I no longer owed them anything, no words, no care, no memories. The signature was written and placed by the only person who mattered, me. One morning, while I was preparing tlacoyos for a community event, a young woman timidly approached me. She introduced herself as the niece of Maxwell's wife. I immediately recognized her by her eyes, an exact copy of Abigail's eyes. With trembling hands, she handed me an envelope, and asked me to give this to you before you left. She divorced your brother a month ago. She said you should know. I silently took the envelope, and she, without waiting for an answer, hurried away. Inside was just one sheet of paper. Abigail's handwriting, small and hurried, like in childhood. She wrote that after that TV interview, memories of how I cared for her suddenly began to return to her, how I combed her hair in elementary school, how I baked cookies for birthdays, how I read her fairy tales. Even when I was deadly tired. And that she would never be able to forgive herself for ignoring me for so long. My silence, she wrote, awakened her more than any reproaches. She also said that Maxwell had become unbearable. He began to play the victim in front of everyone, insisting that I had abandoned them for fame. But no one believed him anymore. Even his wife couldn't take it anymore and left. Samuel Thomas, in turn, took to his bed with a stomach ailment, but flatly refused to go to the doctor. He said he didn't want anyone to see him broken, always so proud, even when there was no one left to send. I read the letter from beginning to end without saying a word. No tears, no hint of a smile, I just carefully folded it and hid it between the pages of an old cookbook. And although I didn't expect their forgiveness, deep down I rejoiced, knowing that at least one of them understood. Reconciliation was unnecessary for me, but the thirst for emotional justice did not fade. And, perhaps, just perhaps, Abigail began to pay for her conscience. One day, on a gray, overcast day, as I was selling food on the cobbled streets of the alley, someone called me by my full name. I turned around and saw him, Samuel Thomas. Emaciated, with a haggard face, but with the same arrogant look, now only covered by fatigue. He walked slowly, as if pride weighed him down more than the years he had lived. I approached him slowly. There was no fear, he no longer had power over me. He looked at me with extinguished eyes and said, "I only came to see you, not to argue." I pointed to a bench under the canopy, and he sat down on it with difficulty. He was silent for a few long seconds, and then he uttered a phrase I never expected to hear, "I didn't think you could achieve all this without us." I replied calmly but firmly, "Is it because you never saw the real me?" He fell silent, as if stunned. It was the truth he desperately tried to deny. He asked for tamales, as if hoping that by tasting them, he could understand something about me. I silently prepared them, as I had many years ago, but this time it wasn't a gift, but an act of closure. He ate slowly, thoughtfully, as if each bite resurrected buried memories. Finishing, he looked up at me and said, "I underestimated you. I thought you would be lost without us." I looked him straight in the eyes, unflinching. "I was lost when I was with you. I found myself when I left." He didn't say goodbye. He simply stood up and, with his head down, walked out into the rain. I watched him go without a trace of anger. The pain was gone, I no longer needed him. His vulnerability didn't bring me gloating, just quiet peace. I realized that there is no harsher punishment for someone who humiliated you than to see the woman he considered worthless flourish. And I, without saying a word, had already forgiven him, but there was no way back. After this unexpected visit, everything went back to normal, but something inside me finally fell into place. It seemed that the last look at Samuel Thomas put an end to my past, as if sealing it. No more excuses, no more explanations were needed. I stopped being a woman craving approval and became someone who approves of herself. And this was reflected even in my seasonings. Every dish became richer, brighter, permeated with my essence. I decided to rent a small place and gave it a name that made me smile, Dona Eleanor Grace Cooks with Dignity. There I cooked my memories, my wounds, and my strength. This place became a haven for women striving to rise. Some came to share their stories, others simply to cry in silence, warming themselves with a hot dish. I listened to them because I knew what it meant to scream inside while maintaining outward calm. One day, a group of students suggested I write a book with my recipes and my story. I agreed, not out of vanity, but because I wanted other women like me to know that even with a wounded soul, you can start all over again. The book was called 40 Years of Cooking in Silence. And when I held it in my hands, I felt that finally, someone had heard me. Me. I never returned to Springfield and didn't want to know anything more about Abigail, Maxwell, or Samuel. If they ever looked for me, I wouldn't know, because a woman who has risen from the depths doesn't go back. I continued to sow life between onions, comalas, and corn cobs. And although I didn't say it out loud, inside I knew that justice had been cooked for me. Today I am 63 years old, and every wrinkle on my face tells a story I am no longer ashamed of. I am no longer the woman who cried in silence in front of the stove, nor the one who waited for the thank you that never came. Now I cook for myself, for my people, for those who feel broken and want to heal with a little rice pudding and a warm tortilla. Today my kitchen is not a penance, it is an act of self-love. My business is thriving. I am invited to fairs, to congresses, to talk about women and invisible work. But I will speak from the heart, without memorized phrases. I will tell the truth, the one I lived. A woman who gives herself completely often ends up with nothing. But I always add that it shouldn't be that way. I understood it late, but I understood it. And as long as I have a voice, I will speak. Sometimes I am asked if I miss my family. I answer that I don't miss the people. I miss the image I created for myself. Eleanor Grace once desperately needed love, but the current Eleanor loves herself. I never became a mother or a wife again, but I became something greater, a whole woman. Loneliness no longer hurts me because I realized that being alone doesn't mean being empty. Now I am full of myself. And if you ever read these lines, just remember that. The woman who cooked for you for 40 years was not useless. She was a sleeping volcano, full of quiet but hot lava. And when she woke up, she did it not to take revenge, but to live. My name is Eleanor Grace, and finally, after a lifetime, I shine, for myself.